you got to hear our own Steve Carleo, who shared children's time this morning. He was sharing with us about Naaman, the story of the prophet Elisha and a man named Naaman. And just in case you weren't here, I'm going to do a quick recap of those first 15 verses of 2 Kings chapter 5. That's where we are in the Elisha narrative. The story goes like this. There was a commander of the army of Aram named Naaman. And the army of Aram at the time was constantly raiding Israel. And on one of these raids, they brought back the girl who became the servant girl of Mrs. Naaman. And one of the things that the Bible says about Naaman, he was a great commander, the army of Aram, but, it said, but he had leprosy. Well, this girl from Israel said one day to Mrs. Naaman, "Oh, that my master," talking about Naaman, "oh, that my master could go to the prophet in Samaria," in greater Israel. He would surely heal him of his leprosy. Well, Naaman thought this would be a good idea, so he got permission from the king to go to see about getting healing in Israel. And the king says, "Well, by all means, I would be happy to write you a letter to take to the king of Israel." So Naaman loads up this big entourage, the chariots, the horses, and a good bit of wealth as gifts. And so there they go, the king of Israel, who is just beside himself when Naaman shows up. He's like scared out of his mind. He says, "This guy wants to be healed of his leprosy. Am I God that I heal people of leprosy?" And he was so upset he tore his clothes. Well, word got back to the prophet Elisha that the king had tore his garments, and he sent word to the king, "Send this man Naaman to me, that he might know if there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman and the whole procession, they head on up to Elisha's place. And they get there and, knock on the door. Elisha doesn't even come to the door. He sends a messenger with this message. "Go to the river Jordan, dip yourself down 7 times, and you will be cleansed of your leprosy." Naaman is incensed. First of all, a messenger came instead of the prophet himself. He says, "I thought that prophet would come out and wave his hand over the leprosy and I would be made clean." He says, "The Jordan, the muddy Jordan, we got nicer rivers in Damascus back home that I could bathe in." So he's not going to do it. His servant's talk sends him to him and said, "Look, if the prophet had told you to do some difficult thing, would you not have done it? So how much more so? Just go and do as the prophet says." So Naaman humbles himself, and he goes down to the Jordan River, and he down under once, he comes up. Down under twice, he comes up. A 3rd time, a 4th time, and then a 5th time. And then a 6th time. But on the 7th time when he went down, he came up, and the Bible says his skin was like that of a young boy. He was healed. And that's where we pick up the story today. This is at 2 Kings chapter 5 and verse 15. Then he, Naaman, returned to the man of God, he and all his company. He came and stood before him and said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. Please accept a present from your servant." And early in the narrative, we'd heard about all the stuff he brought with him. 10 talents of silver. And the talent of silver was anywhere from 57 pounds to 110 pounds, depending on the country. The weights are measured different from country to country, and it's a lot. It's a lot. He had 10 talents of silver with him, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of garments. So he has come now to give this present to Elisha. But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will accept nothing." Naaman urged him to accept, but he refused. Then Naaman said, "If not, please let 2 mule loads of earth be given to your servant, for your servant will no longer offer burnt offering or sacrifice to any god except the Lord. But may the Lord pardon your servant on one count. When my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, leaning on my arm, and I bow down in the house of Rimmon. When I do bow down in the house of Rimmon, may the Lord pardon your servant on this one account." Elisha said to him, "Go in peace." But when Naaman had gone from him a short distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, thought, "My master has let that Aramean Naaman off too lightly by not accepting from him what he offered. As the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something out of him." So Gehazi went after Naaman. Naaman saw someone running after him. He jumped down from the chariot to meet him and said, "Is everything all right?" He replied, "Yes, but my master has sent me to say, 2 members of a company of prophets have just come to me from the hill country of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 changes of clothing." Naaman said, "Well, please accept 2 talents." He urged him and tied up 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 changes of clothing and gave them to 2 of his servants, who carried them in front of Gehazi. When he came to the citadel, he took the bags from them and stored them inside. He dismissed them and they left. Gehazi went in and stood before his master. And Elisha said to him, "Where have you been, Gehazi?" He answered, "Your servant has not gone anywhere at all." But he said to him, "Did I not go with you in spirit when someone left his chariot to meet you? Is this a time to accept money and to accept clothing, olive orchards and vineyards, sheep and oxen, and male and female slaves? Therefore, the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and to your descendants forever." So Elisha left his presence. Gehazi left Elisha's presence leprous, as white as snow. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading of the word. All God's people said, Amen. 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 Quite the set of contrasts here. You have Elisha, who is very firm. There is to be no compensation for this wonderful, wonderful miracle. I'm not going to accept anything. And then you have Gehazi, who says, Elisha's been too easy on this, and you probably just imagine spitting out the word, this Aramean Naaman. Just too easy on him. I'm going to go and I'm going to get something from him. Both men, Elisha and Gehazi say, "As the Lord lives, as the Lord lives, I will not accept anything from Naaman." Elisha's line. And then Naaman says, "As the Lord lives, I'm getting something from this guy." Gehazi lies to Naaman. He out and out lies. Very devious, crafting this lie about these prophets coming. Yet Naaman is gracious. He says, 1 talent of silver, take 2. Gehazi is ripping off Naaman. You ever been ripped off? I hate being ripped off. Have you ever had your credit card stolen? It happened to us a few times, my family. Ever had your identity stolen? Yeah. Got a letter from the IRS. It's Jill and me. He said someone has filed your income tax. Call us. We don't think it's you. So it wasn't us. I called, and this pastor, I pay quarterly. So I asked, well, they filed. Did they make the quarterly payment? He laughed as if that would happen. But that's not good. Somebody steals your identity, or maybe somebody stole your stuff. You ever had your house broken into? Yeah, that's happened to me too. It's not good. It's not good to be ripped off. And Gehazi is ripping off Naaman. Now, if you are the rippee, the one who has been ripped off, it's fine to seek justice. You never want to seek vengeance. It's fine to seek justice. And you should know that God will see to justice. And if you are the ripper offer, look out, because God may just visit justice on you. So it was with Naaman, with Gehazi. Now, in this story, we find Gehazi lying, right? He lies to Naaman, and as so often is the case, if you lie once, then you must lie again to cover up the first lie. Is this not true? Yeah, this is just normally how it works. So you get it deeper and deeper. Because when Gehazi gets back from his little errand, Elisha says, "Where were you?" And he's like, "I didn't go anywhere." And but Elisha knows. He knows. It's kind of like, if you're the parent and you say to your child, did you take a cookie from the cookie jar? And they say, no, Mom. Yet you can see the cookie. That's how it was. That's how it was. Elisha had this supernatural gift from God, knowledge of what had happened, and he calls Gehazi out on it. And Gehazi's punishment is swift. It's like right now. Sometimes the punishment is swift. Sometimes you can think of it as punishment, but sometimes it's just the consequences of what we have done that catch up with us. There's a story of a pirate named Hendrik Lucifer. And the name Lucifer is not in connection with a name that's sometimes used for Satan. It's thought that this was more as a nickname due to his use of fire and smoke to surprise enemies. All right, 1627, there's his picture. Hendrik Jacozoon Lucifer, a Dutch pirate. He was in charge of 3 ships that were transporting colonists to Guyana for the Dutch West India Company. He was accompanied by 2 other pirate captains. And off the coast of Cuba, there was a collision with 2 Honduran treasure ships. This near collision, allowed Hendrik's fleet to capture one of the ships and its contents worth 1.2 million guilders, which was a huge sum of money, still is. Hendrik fought, and he personally killed 10 soldiers in close combat before he himself was hit by a bullet. But he continued to plunder until he was shot again, this time in the chest. He made it back to the ship. His crew finished up the last of the treasure fleet's sailors, and then Hendrik gave the order to transfer the money from the other ship to his own. He then walked to his cabin, slowly lay down on his bed, where he died as a result of his wounds. Consequences, right? Consequences. I think the one takeaway lesson from the story of Hendrik Jacobson Lucifer is that there are more important matters than transporting gold to your grave. In essence, that's what he was doing, transporting gold to his grave. And transporting gold to your grave is exactly what greed is. Your life is consumed by what you pursue. Now, we know the Bible story. Gehazi and his descendants were afflicted with leprosy. And some may see that as unjust. Well, why should my children suffer for my sins? Yet, so often, those who follow us reap what we sow. It's part of the consequences. We have dug deep into the archives of American television to come up with this clip that you're about to see. This was a PSA, a public service announcement, that ran from 1967 to 1982. And you will realize, no matter your age, how much slower television went back then. This is only a minute long. Turn your attention to the screens.
Like father, like son. from smoking and heart disease. Ask your heart association.
Okay, that's just smoking. But think about it. Think about like father, like son. If you are in the habit of lying and cheating, guess what? Your kids are likely to come up in that same habit. If my life is characterized by greed, guess what will characterize the lives of my children? Starts with Ger, ends with Eid. Greed. Gehazi and his descendants both suffered from Gehazi's poor choice. Gehazi tried to profit from Naaman's experience of healing, and then he lied about it. You know, in every era, there are people who are terribly afflicted with diseases and other ailments, and they're desperate to find any word of hope from spiritual leaders. And it seems like there's always a couple of opportunists who will be there to make a quick buck off of or in the name of the Lord. Why pastors take measures? And it's going to be helpful just for Christians generally. So this doesn't happen to us. The first one, I think, is simply to follow Jesus closely. You know, if we follow Jesus closely, we're much less likely to fall into sin. But secondly, it's good for us to create boundaries. Just things so that we're less likely to be tempted. I know when it comes to money, pastors, we are always loath to touch church money. We always make it somebody else signs the check in the church. We don't even like to carry the offering from this place to that place, partly for the sake of temptation, but also partly for what it might look like. My first career, I worked in the defense industry, and one of the pieces of advice I got while working in that industry has just stuck with me and served me well in ministry. An older manager, more seasoned manager, said this to me. He says, "You want always to avoid even the appearance of wrongdoing." Which makes perfect sense, but in the defense industry, you always want to avoid even the appearance of wrongdoing because you cannot afford to have 60 minutes camped out in front of the company gate. Because the government will suspend your contracts immediately while the investigation is made, and then where are you? So it makes sense business-wise, but it also makes sense in our personal lives as Christians. For the sake of our witness, we want to avoid even the appearance of wrongdoing. If only Gehazi, well, obviously he didn't. Luke chapter 12, verse 15, Jesus says these words. He says, "Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Maybe you've heard this one, the one about the greedy man who was in a car accident. He had just parallel parked, and a car came too close to him, and he didn't look. He opened the door of the car, and the